Welcome to the third episode of Pride and Prejudice, a podcast that aims to challenge stereotypes and break down barriers. I'm your host, Jason Oliveira, and for today's episode, we'll be discussing the influence of celebrities and political figures on the public's perception of the LGBTQ+ community. Joining us to explore this topic is LHS guidance counselor Ms. Truncellito, who has been a source of support for students since her return to LHS at the start of this school year. After a decade of teaching experience, Ms. Truncellito found her true calling in counseling, a role that seamlessly aligned with her natural inclination to offer advice and guidance. What sets Ms. Truncellito apart is her keen interest in the evolving landscape of the LGBTQ+ rights and acceptance. She's witnessed firsthand the remarkable shift in societal attitudes and attributes it in part to the influence of pop culture. How are you doing today, Ms. Truncellito?
I'm very well, Jason. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty great myself. I'm pretty excited.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is my first podcast, so.
Of course. As someone who's both educated and an ally of the LGBTQ+ community, you understand how important pop culture can be in shaping the public opinion. Could you share your thoughts on why the views of celebrities and political figures matter when it comes to shaping attitudes towards the LGBTQ+ community?
Sure. So I think that celebrities are very influential because people living, kind of ordinary lives like to idolize anything or anybody who's kind of more glamorous or more powerful or richer or better than them. And so with that power that celebrities have, they can sway opinion one way or the other. So a lot of people look up to celebrities to see what brands they're shopping and what they're wearing, and they just want to be like them and emulate them. And I think that that's why it's so important that celebrities support the LGBTQ movement, because with their support, the movement and support of general society has followed in check with their support, if that makes sense.
No, it does make a lot of sense, and I definitely agree there. And I do have research to back it up. Viacom's Global Consumer Insight Survey across 67 countries found media representation and celebrity acceptance of LGBTQ+ people to be the top factor in changing perceptions for people who do not know someone who's attracted to the same sex. Also, almost a third of respondents said their perceptions of the LGBTQ+ community have improved in the last 5 years. As a teenager, I can say our generation does look up a lot towards political and celebrity figures that are just very influential to kind of guide the way pop culture goes. So they do have a big impact on it. And some would argue that the views of celebrities and politicians should have less of an impact on the public than they do. How do you respond to that perspective?
Oh, I don't think that's a perspective based in reality, because that's our reality. It's, who, and especially when we're talking about the kids and the youth. I mean, if you look at politicians, they are desperate to get the youth vote. And so a lot of times to reach the 18, 19, 20-year-old, 21-year-old market of voters, they're going to use Olivia Rodrigo, or I don't even know what her name is because I'm an old lady. Olivia Rodrigo, is that her name?
Yes, Olivia Rodrigo.
Yes. So I know that Joe Biden, when he was introducing some new initiative, he brought her to the White House because the kids are going to be following Olivia Rodrigo on Instagram and whatever other social media platforms there are. And she's going to put that she was at the White House and here she is with Joe Biden. And, I think that anybody who thinks that it should be less of an influence is just, again, not living in reality, because as human beings, that's what celebrities are. They're people that have this fame because they are charismatic and people want to be around them and want to learn from them and be like them. So I just don't think that they're living in reality, those people.
Their opinions can overshadow other important voices. It's crucial to critically analyze the information from all sorts of sources, considering their expertise, evidence, and diverse perspectives. Ultimately, balancing the influence with diverse sources of information is key to fostering a well-informed society, because a lot of political figures speak out the lack of education and understanding of what they're speaking of, and it creates this ignorance that society will grow upon and contribute. And it just creates this constant, never-ending, continued generation of that ignorance, and that ignorance will create discrimination and stigma. So talking about a lot of political figures and celebrities and politicians, can you share some notable examples of how influential figures, whether they be celebrities or politicians, historically played a role in influencing societal attitudes towards the LGBTQ community?
For sure. I think that for me, I was born in 1978. And so in the 1980s, Magic Johnson was, this basketball player who was on the LA Lakers. And he was really known as this very handsome, charismatic, basketball player. And at the time in the early 90s, in San Francisco and in New York City, there was the HIV outbreak, and it was perceived to be this, homosexual male disease. And so unfortunately, not a lot of attention was given to, funding and researching for this disease. And I very clearly remember being at my grandmother's kitchen table, and there was a special news conference, and Magic Johnson came out and said that he had contracted HIV. And I think for a lot of American society, it was eye-opening that it was not only a male, a homosexual male disease. It affected anybody, because that was the truth behind HIV. It was not, sexual orientation specific. Get it by a blood transfusion or, heterosexual sex. So I think that Magic Johnson probably played for me, the biggest role in kind of shattering stereotypes that had been held up until that point. There were some celebrities who died of HIV after having this life of living as a closeted homosexual, such as Robert Reed, I believe is his name. He was the father in the Brady Bunch. And when he died of HIV, it was, society was kind of like, oh, because he came out as a gay man, in his death. And so that also, again, broke the stereotype, because here he is as an actor playing the father of this very famous family, the Brady Bunch. And then as celebrities began to come out of the closet, I think it allowed regular people in their ordinary lives the courage and the strength to come out of the closet as well. So I think that has all been very helpful to the LGBTQ movement.
HIV and AIDS were one of the leading causes to a lot of stigma towards homosexuality at the time.
Yes.
And another leading figure that helped with it at the time is Marsha P. Johnson, who was a self-identified drag queen, gay liberation activist, and played a key role in the Stonewall riots. She founded the street transvestite action revolutionaries known as STAR, providing refuge for homeless LGBTQ youth, along with Sylvia Rivera, who was also a gay liberation and transgender rights activist in the U.S. Johnson was an HIV and AIDS activist and dedicated much of her time to those infected with the virus. Her life and activism took place during a high anti-gay sentiment, with police involvement in hate crimes. In 1992, Marsha was found dead at the age of 46 in the Hudson River under mysterious circumstances. The police claimed it was suicide, but many say it was highly unlikely, especially given the anti-gay attitude at the time. And among her, another well-known activist at the time that helped move other people to come out publicly was Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected official in California. He was a pioneer for LGBTQ+ rights. His camera store and apartment served as a hub for community activism on issues like human rights, environmentalism, and labor. As a supervisor, Milk played a crucial role in passing a gay rights ordinance in San Francisco that outlawed discrimination in employment and housing. He remains an important figure in the fight for gay rights, and with schools, buildings, and public centers named after him in California. And I do remember reading that two other senators did come out right after he did, and said that they came out because of his inspirational act of coming out as well. So those two, amongst many of the ones you listed too, and many more at the time, are to give a lot of credit to where we are now, because those movements were not easy to go through at the time, especially with all the hate crimes and discrimination that was going on at the time. And overall, we've seen more open support towards the LGBTQ from many aspects. So overall, it has improved.
So again, at the time, there was all this misinformation about HIV because there was no research being put into it, because the politicians wanted to ignore it, because it was considered, a San Francisco, New York City, a homosexual man problem. So unfortunately, people believe that if you touch somebody with HIV, that you could contract it, or if you shared a bottle of water with them, or, shared a straw or anything like that, right? Princess Diana, who is probably, one of the most cherished individuals in the whole wide world, she purposely met with a man with HIV and shook his hand. And this allowed society around the world. This is not even like an American celebrity. Princess Diana is a global figure. She shattered the myth. Oh, if she's touching someone with HIV, maybe, you can't get it from touching. And if she's willing to do that, I can do that too. So I want to really kind of credit Princess Diana for doing that, because it really helped break down the stigma against HIV and kind of lead scientists to get the funding that they had been asking for from the politicians.
In recent years, we've seen more public figures openly supporting and advocating for the LGBTQ+ rights. How has this impacted the broader conversation and acceptance of the community?
So I think that, when you're talking about television shows and pop culture, I know that the show Will and Grace, which was on maybe in like the late 90s, a lot of people credit that show specifically as introducing gay characters to people in smaller communities opposite of a New York City that did not have a large, homosexual or bisexual or pansexual population. So the shows that were broadcast brought to life and it just showed that they're just human beings. It's just a human being with a different sexual orientation. And I think that allowed, again, people to find the courage to come out in those smaller communities because their family and friends were not quite so, they didn't have these myths about them in their head. For me, my high school experience was in the 1990s, and there was no one in my class that was out as anything other than heterosexual. Over the years, working in education, there used to be, and I'm sure there still is in a lot of ways, but it's become much better. There used to be, teasing or making fun of somebody for possibly being gay or a perception of being gay or out of the closet and openly gay. And I'll never, ever forget that, as a reading teacher, we watched this one video about bullying and internet safety, and it kind of touched on a few different topics. And the character in the movie was accused of being gay as an insult. And, a text message was sent around to all the kids in the school about how he was gay and things like that. And after we watched the movie, myself as the reading teacher and the counselor would have conversations in my small group, classes about this movie. And there was one student who raised their hand and said, I don't understand. When they were trying to make fun of the kid for being gay, like what is he being made fun of? And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, who cares that he's gay? And for me, this was a groundbreaking moment of, wow, it's really come so quickly to this acceptance of people are people and who cares what your sexual orientation is. And so after he asked that in that class period, luckily that was a morning class, the next class period and the next class period, I picked the kids' brains where I was like, what did you think about him, making fun of the kid for being gay? And they were like, yeah, I didn't get that part. Like, what's the big deal? Like, so it was so heartwarming for me to see that the acceptance happened. There was really kind of like a time shift. And I think that the celebrity acceptance and pushing for it allowed people to come out of the closet, which normalized it for a lot of people. And that's that, Jason.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. There has been a big movement of people being more open about it and just not really caring.
Being comfortable in their own skin.
Not necessarily not caring. They do care. But in the sense of like, it's not really it's not their right or their business to comment anything on it. It's not their lifestyle. And I think that has been very noticeable in the recent years. And that does come from a lot of the media that we see now. I mean, Laverne Cox, who is known for her role in Orange is the New Black, is a well-known advocate for transgender rights and visibility. And there's Billy Porter, who's an openly gay actor, a singer, and advocate as well. George Takei, known for his role in Star Trek, is a prominent LGBTQ advocate who's been open about his own experience as a gay man as well. And you have politicians like Pete Buttigieg, who was the first openly gay person to launch a major presidential campaign and brought LGBTQ issues to the forefront of the 2020 Democratic primaries. And in 2012, Tammy Baldwin was the first openly gay person to be elected to the U.S. Senate and has been a strong advocate for LGBTQ rights. And there's so many more, such as Freddie Mercury and Carl Nassib and Elliot Page and Sam Smith, among many more, who all openly speak and just create this more natural environment where LGBTQ rights as a whole are talked about normally and in a more educative perspective, because that's how you're going to change. That's how you're going to change people, is by educating them. You're not going to change their opinion by bashing them for their view. You need to open their minds because they have this negative, closed, small-minded idea caused by their ignorance to not open up and understand that it doesn't affect them.
Speaking of that, when you're talking about ignorance and just the misunderstanding of going back to the HIV, there was a boy in I think it was like the late 80s. His name was Ryan White. And anybody who is my age knows exactly who I'm talking about, because Ryan White was very, very famous because he was a hemophiliac. So he needed a lot of blood transfusion as a young man. And he contracted HIV through that blood transfusion. And he lived in Indiana, and the school literally did not allow him to go to school because they said, oh, when you come to school, you're just going to give everybody HIV. He had a brick thrown through his window, and he wound up becoming this real poster child for the idea that HIV cannot be contracted through touching someone or sharing, a cup with them. And there's a very famous after-school movie, The Ryan White Story, that educated youth across America because everybody watched these after-school specials. So that is the kind of education like you're talking about that is needed. It was needed back then. And I think in a lot of ways, there has been so much education, but I think the more that's coming about, the better life is going to improve for the LGBTQ community. If that makes sense again.
It does make sense. And I think the main forefront for promoting that education is going to be political figures because they shape the public perception through so much. They play a significant role in advocating for rights, such as celebrities who are known more for promoting a more inclusive and supportive view of the community, whereas the political landscape has been a little more inconsistent with politicians supporting and others opposing. The main thing, though, is that positive statements and support from these influential figures can help to increase acceptance and understanding of the LGBTQ plus individuals, whereas negative comments or actions can fuel more discrimination or stigma.
Wait, to that point, what I can say is that when it comes to politicians, I remember when Barack Obama first was running, looking at the polls and like the general percentage of Americans that believed in, the Right to Marry Act, he followed the poll numbers, and the poll numbers rose because people were listening and being exposed to these celebrities in the pop culture and educating themselves about, issues involving the LGBTQ community. And that's when his political stance changed, when he saw, oh, this is the will of the people. The American people want this marriage equity law put into place. So I think although sometimes, the politicians should be reflecting the will of the people, I think that, yes, politicians can sway people left and right, but at the same time, the people can also sway the politicians. And I think that kind of combining everything that we're talking about, the pop culture, the celebrities, helped influence the people, and then the people influenced the politicians. And so all of a sudden you saw these people, these politicians were like, no, I would always vote no on the Gay Marriage Act. All of a sudden, because the polls were saying, oh my God, there's so much support for this movement and for this right, then they would change their story and say, oh, okay, well, now it's the will of the people. Now I'm going to vote in favor of this policy. So it all kind of ties together.
It does. I agree there. But political figures do still sway a lot of the public, and it's important for them to use their platforms to promote inclusivity and
100%.
equality, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. And significant progress has been made in the years towards achieving equal rights, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that they're fully integrated and accepted.
Agreed.
Now, talking about how political figures will use their platforms to promote, let's kind of discuss a little more into how do social media platforms amplify the voices and views of both supportive and unsupportive figures when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues.
I think that when we're talking about, politicians who are anti-LGBTQ, I think that unfortunately, when they voice it, it validates amongst people who agree with that, discriminatory way of thinking. It validates their discrimination and it allows it to continue. And it, not to say that it encourages it, but it certainly doesn't stop it. It doesn't make them stop and think, and it certainly does not educate them. So when we have somebody who is using their platforms for positive change, it might sway someone to think in a different manner. So if you're always using your platform and, to create these negative thoughts against a certain type of people, you're never really going to influence people other than the people who already believe what you believe. Versus if there's someone in kind of like the middle of the road, like they don't really know a lot about a topic and want to learn a little bit more about the topic, if you're going to introduce information instead of emotional, reactionary, language, if you're teaching people, that person in the middle of the road will sway towards the more positive side. So I think that social media can be used for the good or bad, depending on what the platform is of the person and what they're using it for.
I definitely think a lot of politicians and celebrities have picked up that social media is a big way to promote their ideology and what they believe and push their values. And we've seen that, however, over the last 4 years, Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit have been the most popular social media platform for Americans to access news from.
Oh, let me ask you this. Among what age group?
Among the older age.
Exactly. I don't see a lot of high school students using Facebook, but my mother does. Don't worry.
But now, these platforms have recently experienced a decline in their popularity as a source of news. Whereas on the other hand, TikTok has shown a steady rise in popularity as a news outlet for its users during the same period. Various studies have also revealed that the younger generation is more likely to obtain their news from social media and trust it, while the older generation will more likely rely on TV and newspapers. That's why it's a big importance to celebrities and political figures using their social media in an educational and accurate way, because a lot of teenagers will not fact check, even adults. There's been so many times my parents have sent me an article saying, oh, I saw this on Facebook. You can't do this now. Trust this. And not, they didn't fact check it. If they fact checked it, they would have seen that's not the reality of what happened. So it's the same thing with the newer generation. Is we're so quick to just look at a screen and believe it, then just dig deeper into it. And so when you have those influential figures using it to promote more stigma and discrimination, that you're feeding into their brains, and that's going to create this subconscious environment in their head that they're going to reflect when they're out in public, which will affect the other people around them, which will affect those people's environment. And it'll continue going like that, like
the domino effect.
Like the domino effect.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, which public figures have stood out in their support for the LGBTQ plus community with their specific actions or statements to you?
Sure. So Princess Diana, for sure, because she shook hands with the man with HIV. I know that Madonna, Lady Gaga, there's a comedian, her name is Joan Rivers. She was very active in supporting LGBTQ rights back in the 1980s. Oh my goodness. Hold on. Her name is going to escape me. Elizabeth Taylor was another one, another famous actress in the 1980s who really took steps to encourage politicians to fund the research towards HIV, education and treatment. Other celebrities, I think that Elliot Page was a great example that you said before, because, there's so much focus, I think, on homosexuality and the lesbians and gay men. I think that the transgender celebrities and people that kind of fall into that category, I think that we need more of that, because I think that we need to give transgender youth, the hope and someone to look up to and someone to see that it's going to be okay. And for me, like the only transgender celebrity that I was aware of was Cher's son. I mean, that was for a long time the only person that I would have said that, if you would ask me who's a transgender person, I would have said Cher's son. As I said before, Magic Johnson is a huge, huge groundbreaker in terms of breaking the stereotype of men with HIV. Ellen DeGeneres, the comedian, she had her show. And as part of her show, I know that when she came out as part of the script to the episode that she was on, when she came out to her friends, they just looked at her and said, "We know you're gay." And it was, pretty groundbreaking at the time, because, it was new for a lesbian character to be on television. Roseanne Barr is another celebrity. Her television show had a lot of, just not even shows that were like, okay, this is going to be our show about this homosexual person. The show just had a homosexual, character as part of the show, because that's what life is. You have people in your life that are this. You have people in your life that are that. So I think a lot of these shows that just kind of showcased, oh, that's the boss over there and he's just a gay man and that's his boyfriend, to normalize it helped.
On the other hand, can you provide examples where negative or uninformed comments from political figures had a detrimental effect on the LGBTQ plus community?
Let's see. I would say the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. I think that what he's doing in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill and kind of eliminating all of these literature from schools, that I think that he's someone who's really negatively impacting the LGBT community and the education system in Florida too, because I know that a lot of teachers are leaving or not working in schools anymore because they really strongly disagree with his policies.
Of course. And for those who do not know, in March 2022, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, signed the Don't Say Gay bill. This law restricts conversations about sexual orientation and gender identity in primary schools using the pretext of parental rights. Supporters say it protects those rights, but critics worry about the impact on LGBTQ plus students in Florida. Many have voiced their opposition to the law, including President Joe Biden, who called it hateful. Chasten Buttigieg, an American teacher, writer, and LGBTQ plus activist who is the husband of Pete Buttigieg, warned that it could harm children, while a controversial amendment sparked concerns by making it mandatory to disclose a student's gender identity or sexual orientation to parents within 6 weeks, putting LGBTQ plus students at risk. Since LGBTQ plus youth have a higher risk of mental health issues, the law's potential to silence discussions on LGBTQ plus topics could worsen stigma and discrimination and increase the risk of bullying, depression, and suicide. Additionally, it could discourage students from openly sharing their experiences and lead to a less inclusive learning environment. Survivors of significant LGBTQ plus events stress the importance of acknowledging their experiences. The Don't Say Gay law, framed as a measure to protect parental rights, potentially infringes on children's right to a safe and inclusive education. The legislation highlights the importance of inclusivity, acceptance, and the significance of teaching a diverse and representative history. It shows how public figures can impact the LGBTQ youth and emphasize the power of influential voices in shaping public opinion, advocating for rights, and fostering inclusivity and acceptance. And another important aspect to the way political figures have been impacting the communities through Title IX. Ms. Truncellito, can you provide a brief description of what Title IX is for the listeners who do not know?
Sure. Title IX prohibits discrimination based on sex in education and activities that receive federal funding. So what this means is at any school that receives money from the United States government, they cannot discriminate based on a person's sex, whether it's male or female. This not only involves sports. A lot of people have the perception that Title IX is only about sports. That's a big part of it. But it also involves any club or activity at any publicly funded school by the U.S. government.
Yes, exactly. That is correct. And President Donald Trump's administration made changes to the transgender protections established by President Barack Obama in 2017. One of the significant changes was the removal of the Dear Colleague letter. This document was crucial in interpreting how Title IX applied to gender identity and transgender status. The Dear Colleague letter guided federally funded schools on how to protect transgender students. It emphasized creating a safe and non-discriminatory environment and providing access to facilities that aligned with their gender identity. The letter also addressed identification documents, names, and pronouns, along with sex-segregated activities, facilities, and privacy in education records. The Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos, appointed by President Trump, withdrew this guidance, which became controversial and received mixed reactions. The policy change meant that transgender students lost protection and support from the federal government. Former President Trump defended the decision, saying that the policies regarding transgender bathrooms should be determined at the state level. The public's perception was divided, with some expressing concern while others applauded the decision. The Obama-era guidance lacked sufficient legal analysis consistent with Title IX, according to President Trump and Education Secretary DeVos. It is important to mention that in 2021, however, President Biden signed 2 executive orders to reinstate protections under the Title IX against discrimination towards sexual orientation and gender identity. And Ms. Truncellito, did you know that the first landmark Supreme Court case that tested Title IX protections was centered around a transgender student named Gavin Grimm?
Gavin Grimm is definitely, yes, I recognize the name. And if I were to look up his picture, I know that I would recognize him. I'm not familiar with the entire case, but I do know that he was from Virginia, I believe.
Yep, the journey of Gavin Grimm, a transgender student from Gloucester, Virginia, began in 2014 when he came out as transgender and started using the boys' restroom at school with permission. However, after parental complaints, the school board voted to ban him, leading to a legal battle supported by the American Civil Liberties Union, known as ACLU. The case reached the Supreme Court in 2017, but was sent back to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals due to changes in Title IX guidance by Trump's administration. In 2020, the Fourth Circuit ruled in Gavin's favor, stating that the school's policy violated Title IX. Despite the school board's petition, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected it in 2021, establishing a precedent for states in the Fourth Circuit and influencing future transgender right battles. This case illustrates how public figures like former President Donald Trump impact transgender rights by withdrawing Obama-era protections. Media coverage played a crucial role in shaping public opinion, emphasizing the importance of inclusive policies and shedding light on the challenges faced by transgender individuals in educational settings. The Fourth Circuit's decision not only affirmed the rights of transgender students, but set a precedent for equal protection under the law. While directly affecting the Fourth Circuit states only, this decision holds nationwide importance, serving as a guide for future legal battles over transgender rights. Grimm's story underscores the need for advocacy, legal action, and public awareness to advance the rights and protections of the LGBTQ community, emphasizing the profound impact of political decisions on the lives of individuals within this community. Ms. Truncellito, how can we encourage more influential figures to use their platform to promote LGBTQ plus rights and inclusivity, and what impact might this have on the public?
I think if the more and more celebrities that support the LGBTQ movement, it's only going to help public support. I will say one area when we're talking about pop culture that I think when this barrier is broken, it's going to really, really create more support for LGBTQ youth and movements and lifestyles. I think that the sporting world is a world where there's still that stigma and there's still that fear of judgment, whether it's football players, professional, NFL players, NBA players, soccer players, hockey players. I think that that is an area when those men and women, I mean, really listen, I think that it's more of a male thing within the athletes, right? So I think that when more men come out of the closet in their sport to say, this is who I am, and, I'm not ashamed of myself, and, I think that that will be very, very groundbreaking for other men in, ordinary society that are not these like all-star athletes, to help them become more comfortable in their own skin. So that is, I think the celebrities, like, we talked about Lady Gaga, and we know which celebrities are going to be supportive of the movement. I think the more, obviously I would like them to speak more, and, I just would like new voices to come to the market. And I think that the sporting world would be a field where it would be really, really just open up a lot of doors for people, and allow people to be more comfortable in their own skin, and provide, for the youth, maybe provide a role model or someone to look up to in that regards. Maybe those kids can't relate to Elliot Page. They can't relate to Lady Gaga. But if there was this athletic, football player, that is who they can relate with. So I think that I look forward to when that barrier is broken down. And I think that it can only improve the entire movement.
It shows that looking ahead, you see a lot of potential future impact of influential figures' views on the community, and along with other figures amongst other areas as well. And clearly you see that many steps can be taken to progress in this area. While public figures still have a significant role to play in promoting societal progress, it is important to note we've made substantial advances. There's still so much work to be done, so thank you so much, Ms. Truncellito, for sharing your expertise and insights on how celebrities and political figures influence societal attitudes towards the LGBTQ+ community.
It is an honor, Jason. I'm so happy to be here. And can I just say, like, as someone who is 45 years old, the movement has made such positive, progressive change in the time that I've been alive, that I've seen. And I look forward to the next chapter of the positive movement for all LGBTQ youth, people, human beings. So thank you so much for having me here today, Jason.
Of course. I'm so happy I had you here. Before we conclude, it's crucial to acknowledge that we, as the audience, possess the power to shape perspectives. We can advocate for diversity, demand genuine representation, and share stories that can genuinely make a difference. If you found this episode of Pride and Prejudice informative, please share with your friends, family, or anyone who can benefit from this conversation. Let's also amplify our voices and create change. Join us next time for another enlightening discussion. Also, feel free to check out my other podcast, The Queer Quarters, on Instagram, TikTok, and soon Spotify. Meanwhile, remember that it's not just about breaking down barriers, it's about creating a world where every individual story is acknowledged and celebrated. Keep listening, learning, and challenging preconceptions. This is Jason Oliveira signing off, reminding you that every story matters.